Here are the stories shaping the world this morning and why they matter.
In Gaza, medical and hospital sources reported new Israeli strikes that killed Palestinians in several separate incidents, while Israel's military said it would open criminal investigations into two of the most prominent suspected war crime cases from earlier fighting against Hamas. Medical sources said an Israeli airstrike killed 6 Palestinians at a police post in Gaza City. A separate strike in the Nuseirat refugee camp killed 1 Palestinian, bringing Wednesday's reported death toll in those incidents to at least 7. Hospital officials also said an Israeli strike on a fishing seaport killed at least 6 people, including a child, and wounded more than a dozen others. Israel's military said that strike targeted Hamas commanders and other militants, but it did not present evidence in the accounts cited this morning. The new military investigations will examine the January 2024 killing of 6-year-old Hind Rajab, 6 family members, and 2 medics in Gaza City, a case that became a symbol of the war's toll on children and rescue workers. A second probe concerns the killing of 15 rescue workers in a convoy of ambulances and emergency vehicles. For Palestinian families in Gaza, the immediate reality remains loss, displacement, fear, and the collapse of basic services. For international law advocates, the opening of criminal investigations is important, but only a first step. Accountability depends on whether evidence is preserved, witnesses are protected, and findings are made public. Diplomatically, Jared Kushner ended a regional trip with no major progress reported after talks with Israeli and Hamas leaders, leaving civilians still waiting for a durable ceasefire, more aid access, and a political path beyond repeated cycles of violence. The United States and Iran are giving sharply conflicting accounts of a standoff around the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important energy corridors. President Donald Trump said no talks with Iran were taking place and none were scheduled. He also said a U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz was in full force and effect, while also saying the strait was open and operating. Iranian officials gave a different account, saying the waterway would not reopen until U.S. commitments were met and arguing that a ceasefire-related process had collapsed. Iran's top negotiator said the Strait of Hormuz would remain closed until the United States lifted the blockade, released frozen assets, lifted oil sanctions, and ended threats in military operations. Officials in Qatar said an Iran-Oman agreement over the waterway could make it easier for Iran and the United States to resume talks. But tensions also widened after Trump threatened to bomb Oman if it got in the way of efforts to reach a deal, according to the accounts cited this morning. A 60-day ceasefire deal expired without an agreement to end the war, and Iran's foreign ministry said Tehran would shift to a fully offensive military posture after accusing the United States of violating a June 18th memorandum of understanding. For ordinary people, the risk is not abstract. Any prolonged disruption in the Strait of Hormuz can affect fuel prices, shipping costs, food prices, and job stability far beyond the Gulf. Energy importers, commercial sailors, port workers, and families already facing high costs would feel the pressure quickly. The constructive opening, however narrow, is that regional mediators, including Qatar and Oman, are still being discussed as possible channels for de-escalation.
Ukraine and Russia traded major overnight attacks, with Ukrainian drones striking across Russia and Russian attacks killing civilians in several parts of Ukraine. Ukraine launched nearly 800 drones across Russia overnight, described as one of its largest such attacks since Moscow's full-scale invasion more than 4 years ago. Most of the drones targeted the Moscow region, where a local official reported damage at a construction site. Ukraine has increasingly relied on swarms of long-range drones to try to overwhelm Russian air defenses and bring pressure closer to Russian military and logistical centers. Inside Ukraine, officials said Russian strikes caused severe civilian casualties. Authorities in northeastern Ukraine said at least 10 people were killed and more than a dozen injured when a Russian missile strike destroyed homes and businesses. In Kherson, officials said another attack killed 5 people and wounded 4 others. A cafe owner whose business was hit described dust, smoke, screams, and burning cars. That kind of testimony captures what strategic language often misses. These attacks land in neighborhoods, workplaces, shops, and homes, affecting people who are trying to keep daily life functioning under wartime conditions. The pattern this morning is one of intensifying long-range pressure on both sides but the human burden remains heavily concentrated among civilians in Ukraine's cities and towns. Emergency crews, hospital staff, utility workers, and local volunteers continue to be central to survival and recovery after each strike. The need for air defense, humanitarian support, and eventual negotiations remains urgent, even as the battlefield shows little sign of a quick resolution.
Japan and Yemen's internationally recognized leadership discussed maritime security as Houthi fighters claimed another attack in the Red Sea. Japan's transport minister met Rashad Mohammed al-Alami, the leader of Yemen's interim government, in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. Their talks focused in part on safeguarding shipping in the Middle East, especially around the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, a narrow passage linking the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Yemen's location gives it major importance for global trade and energy shipments, particularly when tensions also affect the Strait of Hormuz. Japan's minister said Yemen's stability is important to global development and condemned Houthi attacks on ships and other targets. Al-Alimi thanked Japan for its support and praised Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific policy. The two sides agreed to develop bilateral ties, including cooperation connected to maritime security. At the same time, Houthi fighters said they had launched a missile attack on a Saudi ship in the Red Sea after declaring a maritime blockade on Saudi Arabia last month. The United Nations has warned that recent Houthi attacks have killed at least 17 civilians. For global consumers, Red Sea insecurity can mean higher shipping costs and delayed goods. For sailors and port workers, it means direct danger at work. For Yemenis, it is another layer on top of years of war, hunger, damaged infrastructure, and fragile governance. The talks with Japan show that governments far from the Red Sea see Yemen's stability as tied to global economic security. The challenge is turning maritime protection into a broader effort that also reduces civilian harm and supports Yemen's long-term recovery. Israel carried out 8 airstrikes on the runway of Syria's Abu al-Duhur airbase in Idlib, according to Damascus and Washington. The Syrian government said the strikes damaged hangars and other installations, with no injuries reported. The airfield had been knocked out of service during Syria's civil war, and Turkey had been helping reactivate it in recent months. Turkey rejected Israeli allegations that it posed a threat by preparing to send troops to the base. Syria's government is led by President Ahmed al-Sharaa, a former rebel commander, and the country remains deeply fragile after years of conflict, displacement, and foreign military involvement. U.S. envoy Tom Barrack criticized the Israeli strikes as an unnecessary escalation that did not advance regional stability. That criticism is notable because it frames the attack not only as a military action, but as a move with broader regional consequences. For Syrians living near military sites, even strikes that cause no reported injuries can bring fear, disruption, and the risk of renewed escalation. For families trying to rebuild after the civil war, every new round of regional confrontation can slow recovery, discourage investment, and complicate humanitarian work. The immediate question is whether Israel, Turkey, Syria, and outside powers can avoid turning a runway dispute into another flashpoint. The more constructive path would be transparent security talks, deconfliction measures, and a focus on preventing Syria from becoming a wider battlefield again.
In France, a cyber attack exposed personal information for 7.7 million people, including data from the tax office. Officials said the tax office breach happened in June, but affected people only began receiving notification emails this week. The exposed information included names, phone numbers, addresses, and taxable income. Government ministries, health services, and a prison were also targeted by hackers. The government admitted failures and apologized. The breach matters because tax and health information can be used for fraud, scams, identity theft, and targeted harassment. For families, workers, retirees, and small business owners, a data leak is not just a technical problem. It can mean months of monitoring accounts, changing passwords, questioning suspicious messages, and worrying about whether private financial details may be misused. A cybersecurity expert cited in the reports pointed to serious security flaws, raising questions about how public institutions protect sensitive information. The French government's apology is an important acknowledgement, but the test now is practical. Faster notification, better defenses, clear support for affected people, and accountability for agencies that failed to secure public data. Across Europe and beyond, the incident is a reminder that public digital systems are now basic infrastructure. They need the same seriousness as roads, hospitals, and power grids, because when they fail, ordinary people carry the cost.
The World Health Organization warned that the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is far from under control. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus told an emergency meeting that the outbreak, which began spreading in May, remains a major public health emergency. The agency said almost 5,000 people have been infected and more than 2,300 have died. It also said there are no effective vaccines for the virus behind the latest outbreak. The WHO said more than 1,000 additional health workers will be mobilized, and hospital bed capacity is set to increase to 3,000. Those numbers matter because outbreak control depends on speed. Identifying cases, isolating patients safely, tracing contacts, protecting health workers, and giving communities reliable information. In affected areas, families are facing not only grief and fear, but also disrupted work, school, travel, and access to ordinary medical care. Health workers face some of the highest risks, especially when protective equipment, staffing, and treatment space are limited. The warning is serious, but it is also a call to action rather than a message of helplessness. The Democratic Republic of the Congo has experience confronting Ebola, and international support can help if it arrives quickly and respects local communities. The most effective response will combine medical resources with trust building, clear communication, safe burial practices, fair access to care, and support for families who lose income while isolating or caring for relatives.
Communities in Chiba Prefecture, Japan, are still recovering from record rainfall that killed at least 13 people and damaged thousands of homes. Local officials confirmed at least 13 deaths and said one person remained missing after last week's record-breaking rainfall. More than 2,300 houses were damaged by flooding. In one case, a man whose car was swept away survived, but a male relative who went to help him was later found in a rice paddy and confirmed dead. Chiba City is also dealing with the aftermath on its roads. Roughly 2,500 vehicles were abandoned after the deluge, and authorities expected all abandoned vehicles to be moved as early as Wednesday. Police had confirmed at least 8 cases by Tuesday of drivers hitting abandoned vehicles, mostly in the dark. Clearing the roads is not only about traffic, it is essential for ambulances, supply deliveries, cleanup crews, and residents trying to return to damaged homes. For families affected by the flooding, recovery will mean drying out houses, replacing belongings, filing insurance claims, finding temporary shelter, and coping with trauma. For elderly residents and people with disabilities, the cleanup can be especially difficult without community support. Japan has strong disaster response systems, but record rainfall is testing local capacity in new ways. The constructive focus now is on restoring safe roads, helping households repair damage, and improving warning systems and drainage infrastructure as extreme rainfall becomes a growing challenge. South Korea said joint military drills with the United States will be shortened at Washington's request. The annual All-Chi Freedom Shield exercise began Monday and had been scheduled to run through August 27th. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said Wednesday that the exercise would instead end Friday. South Korean officials also said Seoul and Washington were discussing scaling back field maneuvers. The move follows President Donald Trump's order on Sunday to substantially reduce joint military drills with South Korea. Trump said the exercises sent a totally inappropriate and hostile signal to North Korea. South Korean media reported that training based on counterattack scenarios against North Korea would be cancelled. A US media report said Trump was pushing for a meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as soon as this autumn. For South Koreans, the issue is not only military planning, it touches daily life in a country where generations have lived under the shadow of possible conflict. Reduced exercises may lower tensions if paired with serious diplomacy, but they can also raise questions about readiness and alliance coordination. Workers near bases, military families, and border communities often feel the effects of these decisions first. The best outcome would be a balanced approach, reducing unnecessary provocation while maintaining deterrence. transparency, and channels that lower the risk of miscalculation.
The Trump administration imposed sanctions on leaders of the International Criminal Court, including President Tomoko Akane, a Japanese judge who took office in 2024. Secretary of State Marco Rubio released a statement calling the ICC corrupt and fatally politicized and accusing it of abusing its authority. The sanctions require any assets held in the United States to be frozen. U.S. officials objected to an ICC-approved investigation into alleged war crimes by American troops in Afghanistan. The administration also condemned arrest warrants issued for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over alleged war crimes. The ICC said targeting the court undermines the rule of law and places the international legal order at risk. The State Department said it was ready to take further action until the court could no longer threaten U.S. sovereignty. This dispute goes to the heart of international accountability. The ICC was created to prosecute genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and aggression when national systems are unable or unwilling to act. Critics argue it has overreached or applied justice unevenly. Supporters argue that weakening the court makes it harder for victims, including civilians in war zones, to seek accountability when powerful states or armed leaders are involved. For ordinary people harmed by war crimes, international justice can feel slow and distant, but it may be one of the few available paths. The immediate concern is that sanctions against court leadership could chill investigations and deepen the divide between power politics and legal accountability.
In the occupied West Bank, a Palestinian-American homeowner raised a U.S. flag over his home during a settler siege that drew renewed criticism from Washington and international attention. The Ohio-based homeowner flew back on Monday to one of 3 homes where residents had been trapped by Israeli settlers, according to the reports. Residents said settlers had blocked food and other supplies for more than a week. The homeowner raised the U.S. flag in an apparent effort to signal his American citizenship and draw protection. Washington renewed criticism of the siege, which had already drawn condemnation from around the world. The homeowner said residents feared what would happen after international media and the Israel Defense Forces left the scene. He also said settlers had still come down and demanded he leave even with Israeli forces present. For Palestinians in the West Bank, settler violence and movement restrictions can affect the most basic parts of life: access to food, water, work, school, medical care, and family homes. For Palestinian Americans, the incident also raises questions about whether U.S. citizenship brings equal protection abroad. The constructive response would require consistent law enforcement, protection for civilians regardless of identity, and accountability for those who block supplies or threaten residents. Without that, individual families remain vulnerable even when the world briefly pays attention.
Campaigning has begun in Nigeria 5 months before the presidential election, with President Bola Tinubu seeking a second term. Nigeria is Africa's most populous nation and was described in the reports as the continent's 3rd largest economy. The election is opening against a difficult economic backdrop. Tinubu's reforms have been praised by some experts as necessary for long-term repair, but they have also contributed to a cost of living crisis. Tinubu said earlier this year that painful changes were needed to fix the economy over time. For many Nigerians, the central issues are immediate: inflation, food prices, fuel costs, jobs, security, and whether wages can keep up with daily expenses. More than half the population lives below the poverty line. That means economic policy is not an abstract debate. It determines whether families can afford transport, school fees, medicine, rent, and basic meals. Security is also a major voter concern, with communities in different regions facing violence, kidnappings, and pressure on local livelihoods. As the campaign begins, voters will be weighing promises against lived experience. The most useful debate will be less about political spectacle and more about concrete plans: reducing inflation, protecting the poorest households, creating decent work, improving electricity and transport, and making communities safer. Nigeria's scale means its choices matter well beyond its borders, but the election will be decided by citizens asking whether government can make daily life more secure, affordable, and fair. Follow for a daily world brief. Sources are linked in the description. The end.
That's the world as Minerva saw it. The end.